Welcome to Paramedic Pharmacology. Let's start with the basics. Pharmacology is the study of drugs and their effects on living tissue. And drugs are chemicals that affect living tissues and are used to treat, diagnose, and/or prevent diseases and medical problems. How long has this been going on? Well, probably since the first time that somebody recognized that eating the wrong plant would make you sick, but there have been at least 5,000 years of documented use of drugs. Digitalis, however, was the first drug that was ever actually prescribed to treat the disease, specifically congestive heart failure, called dropsy in those days. Smallpox vaccinations were first created in 1796, the first time a specific treatment was used to prevent a disease. Insulin was discovered in 1921 and used to treat diabetes. This is the first time that anybody had been able to treat diabetes. Before that, it was basically a death sentence. Antibiotics were initially discovered in 1936 when sulfa drugs were recognized to kill bacteria, and penicillin was recognized in 1941 to be a different kind of antibiotic that could kill a different type of bacteria. There are 4 different sources for drugs: plants, animals, mostly used for hormones, minerals, for instance, sodium chloride, which is used to make normal saline, and nowadays synthetic drugs, which are created primarily in the laboratories. Any drug that needs to be marketed to the general public goes through a series of developmental stages. These are used to determine both the efficacy and the safety of the drugs. The first stage is a preclinical trial. This is when the drug is used on animals, just basically to see what happens, both in terms of how it affects the body and if it will possibly treat a disease. In phase 1, healthy volunteers are used to determine the effective doses and to see what effects the drugs have on people. In phase 2, small groups of humans who have a disease that is trying to be treated are given the drug, and this is used to determine whether or not the drug will do the job that it is expected to do. In phase 3, there are large controlled studies using a large number of patients, usually with a placebo control, to determine if it actually does the job. Phase 4 is when it is released as a marketable drug, and at this point is turned loose basically on an uncontrolled population. A drug can be removed from the market at this phase when in uncontrolled studies it shows significant problems of safety or efficacy. Orphan drugs are specifically drugs that are studied but are not produced. There may be many reasons for this, but the most common ones are too few potential patients for the production to be profitable. There are too many risks using the drugs, and the drug companies would not be insurable, or the production is just too expensive to justify. In these cases, the government has established a fund for the few patients for whom these drugs could be used. The standard source in the United States is the United States Pharmacopoeia, or USP. This has all the information about the drugs that are used in the United States. The National Formulary used to be one of the sources, but has been since rolled into the USP. You'll still see drugs with the term NF after their names, and this is simply because they were old enough to initially be on the National Formulary. The Martindale Pharmacopoeia is also another excellent source. However, it is quite large and difficult to carry around since it consists of about 12 volumes. The Physician Desk Reference is not actually a pharmacopoeia. It is a collection of all of the drug information sheets. The PDR is put out by the drug companies, and not all of the drugs are in the PDR. They do have great pictures of the pills, however. Other references include nursing drug references and paramedic street references, both of which are very handy. The nursing drug references are far more complete, but contain drugs that you will never use. And lastly, there are multiple online references. Be sure that you watch out for accuracy. Some are better than others. Hippocrates is one of the better ones. Every drug has four names. There is the chemical name, such as ethyl 1-methyl-4-plenicitinopectate hydrochloride. Okay, you don't have to pronounce that. This is the universal name. Anywhere in the world, this would be recognized by a chemist as describing this particular drug. The generic name is usually nation-specific. For instance, meperidine hydrochloride is the generic name that is used in the United States for a drug that is called by a different name in Canada. The official name, though, is specifically the generic name with the term USP after it. Normally, the generic name is the official name with the USP, but there are occasions where the generic and the official name are not identical. In addition to that, there is a trade or brand name. This is determined by the company that decides to market the drug. For instance, the trade name for this drug is Demerol. Let's talk about some of the legal aspects of drug history. Before 1906, anybody could mix up any type of compounded formula and market it to cure anything. Realizing the potential hazards involved, the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act established the Food and Drug Administration to oversee the production and purity of the drugs that were being administered. It restricted non-useful and abusable drugs. In other words, it took the supposedly snake oil drugs off the market. In 1912, however, the Shirley Amendment was added to prohibit false or misleading claims. In 1938, the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act established testing for safety before marketing. This came about because the sulfa drugs, which had been released for marketing, were sometimes compounded with lethal solvents, such as ethylene glycol. In 1962, the Kefauver-Harris Amendment established testing for both safety and efficacy. In other words, the drug might be safe but not do anything, in which case it shouldn't be on the market. On the other side are the regulations surrounding abusable drugs. Before 1914, any drug, whether it was abusable or not, could be used in any compound. Think Coca-Cola, which originally had cocaine in it. The Harrison Narcotic Act regulated the control of abusable substances. And in 1970, the Controlled Substance Act was passed to classify abusable drugs and regulate them. This is the law under which you are giving your drugs. There are two drug agencies involved then with the drugs that you administer. One is the FDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. The FDA establishes safety, purity, and efficacy of drugs. The DEA, Drug Enforcement Administration, enforces the drug laws. And by the way, notice that the FBI is the enforcement arm of this. This is a division of the Department of Justice. Let's talk about drug abuse. Drug abuse is generally defined as self-directed use of drugs. This covers both street drugs and non-physician condoned use of prescription drugs. Generally speaking, drug abuse implies non-therapeutic purposes, although people who abuse prescription drugs will be happy to tell you that they are using them for prescription purposes such as pain relief. Some of the drug abuse appears to be framed in cultural norms. For instance, peyote, which is a drug used in certain Indian religious rites, is considered a Schedule I drug and is illegal. However, the cultural norms say that this is not a problem within the tribes that use it. There are 5 levels of scheduled drugs. Schedule I drugs have no recognized medical use and have high abuse potential. These include heroin, LSD, PCP, marijuana, and methaqualone, among many others. Schedule II drugs have accepted medical use but high abuse potential. These require a written prescription or direct delivery by the physician who is prescribing the drug. Morphine, secobarbital, cocaine, and amphetamines fall into this schedule. Schedule III drugs have acceptable medical use have moderate abuse potential, and these include such things as opioids in combination, Tylenol with codeine, oxycodone, things like that, and anabolic steroids. Schedule 4 drugs have accepted medical use, low abuse potential, and include phenobarbital, benzodiazepines, and butorphanol. Schedule 5 drugs have accepted medical use and very low abuse potential. This includes codeine-based cough syrup and diphenoxylate, which is used to treat diarrhea. In some states, these drugs can be sold over the counter, although that is not true in the state of Colorado. When you are giving scheduled drugs, you have to follow the DEA's regulations. These include regulations that control how the drug is purchased and administered. It must be done under a DEA license, which you will not have. The drug has to be stored and locked prior to use. The use of the drug has to be appropriately documented. And if there is any waste drug or unused drug, it must be disposed of in such a fashion that it cannot be used again. Whatever agency you work for will have protocols that will tell you how to waste your drugs. Any out-of-date drugs have to be returned to the manufacturer or to the source of the drugs. Do you have a DEA license? No, but your medical director does. He or she is responsible for the actions of personnel under his or her license. This includes giving scheduled drugs, which allows you to give them by delegation of his DEA licensure. Your medical director is the one who authorizes protocols for all drug administration and delegates authority for direct online medical control. He or she is not immediately available. Interestingly, doctors can prescribe drugs for non-FDA approved indications. This is unusual, but it may occur that your physician can order a drug for an indication even if the FDA has not yet approved the medication for that indication. Let's talk about the different drug forms, starting with liquids. Solutions. This is where a drug is dissolved in a liquid, usually water. Syrups are basically a solution in a sugary liquid. Think cough syrups. How else are you going to get those down a kid's throat? Suspensions are not dissolved. The drug will actually settle out to the bottom of the bottle, and you have to shake the bottle to resuspend it before administering it. Emulsions are a suspension of oil in water. The classic emulsion is salad dressing, but there are drugs that are suspensions of oil in water. Tinctures, spirits, and elixirs are various alcohol-based solutions. Solids come in various types: pills, tablets, capsules, caplets. Suppositories are a wax-based form of drug administration, usually used for vaginal or rectal use. They melt at body temperature and therefore, while they are being stored, have to be kept at fairly cool temperatures. Leaving them in a hot ambulance will allow them to melt within their protective coverings. Inhalants may be either liquid or powdered substances that are aerosolized for inhalation. There are terms that are specific for pharmacology that you need to be very familiar with. Let's start off with indications. Indications are the conditions for which the drug is to be used. Contraindications, on the other hand, are conditions under which a drug should not be used. That's pretty straightforward. Therapeutic effects are the desired intended action of a drug. The side effects are known additional actions of drug in addition to the therapeutic action. Untoward effects, on the other hand, are unexpected and potentially harmful effect of a drug. Some side effects can become untoward if they are more significant than normal. Hypersensitivity is used in several ways. The actual definition is an unusual, strong, or harmful reaction to a drug. But in some cases, people use this as for an allergic reaction to the drug, which is not the same thing. An allergic reaction, however, implies an immune response by the body, and hypersensitivity does not necessarily require that response. Idiosyncratic reactions, or idiosyncrasy, implies an unusual reaction to a drug that is not caused by allergies. These can be such things as the unusual effect that Benadryl has on some children, which makes them more active, not more drowsy. Toxicity, on the other hand, has a specific definition, and this is the known adverse effects of drugs at high doses. Any drug in a high enough dose can be toxic. Antagonism is the opposition of action of two drugs. If two drugs are given at the same time, they may oppose each other's actions and therefore decrease the effect of one drug or the other. This can be competitive, where one drug actually competes with the other drug for the same receptor sites, or it can be non-competitive, where they have two different actions that cancel each other out. They can also have a chemical antagonism, where one of the drugs is inactivated by a chemical interaction. For instance, giving sodium bicarbonate in the same line as a catecholamine, such as epinephrine or dopamine, will inactivate the catecholamine. Potentiation is the additive effect of two drugs. Usually this is a 1+1 effect. Each drug adds to the other in a linear fashion. For instance, if you give two different types of opioids, they tend to be additive or potentiate each other. Synergism, on the other hand, is a multiplied effect of two drugs. In this case, when you give two drugs, you don't have an additive effect. It multiplies the effect. For instance, phenobarbital is a sedative and alcohol is a sedative. However, when taken in conjunction with each other, the sedation goes beyond just the additive effect and can be a lethal combination. A cumulative effect is caused when you have an increasing effect of the drug after multiple doses. This would be when you give a long-acting drug such as morphine and continue to give, say, 2 milligrams every 2 minutes when we know that the drug will last for approximately 15 to 30 minutes. Each dose will increase the effect of the drug. Refractory means that the patient does not respond to normal doses of a drug. Tolerance, on the other hand, means that the patient has been taking the drug long enough that he requires increasing amounts of drug to achieve the same therapeutic effect. Habituation or addiction implies there is physical or psychological dependence on the drug and that there is a significant withdrawal pattern associated with stopping use of that drug. Thank you for listening to this lecture.